Okay, I think we're all set. Well, welcome everybody. Happy summer. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I was just saying to Shanna, what a great turnout for July 18th. People are traveling and enjoying some time off of school and work, and yet still found this topic compelling enough to make it this morning. So thank you again for joining us. I'm Griffin O'Shaughnessy, the founder and CEO of Canopy Advisory Group. Canopy is an on-demand talent firm ready to foster growth, accelerate performance, and tackle organizational challenges with our network of top-tier professionals. Part of our vision at Canopy includes connecting all of you, our broader community, with incredible experts like Shanna Weber, our guest this morning. Shanna is a professional coach and a leadership expert working with organizations to build cultures and teams. Prior to her work as a professional coach, Shanna spent 23 years in executive leadership roles in the financial industry, working in corporate strategy at both Charles Schwab and Janus Henderson. Shanna has put together a really insightful presentation for us this morning on tackling generational differences and similarities in the workplace. We would love for this to be an interactive conversation, so please feel free to ask questions live at any point or throw them in the chat, and we will monitor that for her. We also have a few poll questions throughout the session, so watch for those as well. Shanna, we're so honored to have you here this morning, and with that, I will let you take it away. And Shanna, you popped in on mute.
Sorry, a lot of screens going on. Okay.
Morning.
Thanks,
Welcome.
Griffin, for the opportunity to be here today. And good morning to everyone. Thanks for joining us. As you might know, for the first time in history, we have 5 generations actively participating in the workplace. And I'm sure you've probably noticed, shall we say, confusion around how to effectively work with some people from different generations. My goal here is to help clear some of that confusion. But before we dig in, I want to see how much you all already know about the different generations. So we're going to do a pop quiz. So these questions are going to come at you fast. So let's start going. Compared to other generations, this generation received the least parental discipline. Who are they? Silent generation, millennials, Gen X, or Gen Z?
And the silent generation is defined as the boomers, right?
No, silent generation is older than the boomers.
Older than the boomers, okay.
And they are still working. We'll get to that. Am I able to see the results? Oh, I have to.
Yes, I think Serena, when you end the poll, then the results will show up. Is that right?
There we go. Okay, so we have about half of you said millennials, half of you said Gen X. And the answer is Gen Z. And I think everybody finds this one a little bit surprising because the Gen Xers are those latchkey kids where we had no supervision whatsoever. However, less than half of Gen Z agreed with the statement that said, my parents followed through with discipline if I broke the rules. All right, moving on to the second question. 25% of this generation plays online video games. Who are they? Baby boomers, millennials, Gen Z, or Gen X? And do we have the poll up?
Serena, I think the poll isn't showing up on people's screens anymore.
Yeah, I think it got closed so that she could see the last answer because it was all one.
There we go. There we go. Okay.
There we go. Okay.
All right. So 25% of this generation plays online games, online video games. Who are they? Baby boomers, millennials, Gen Z, or Gen X?
And Shanna, while we are answering these polls, will you define the generations again for those? I know you have it further in the presentation, but just quickly.
Yeah, and yes. So Well, I think kind of we want to see if you have labels for people, I think.
Oh, okay.
Without knowing who they are. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Now I can't see the poll again. Did we get a response?
I think because all the questions are in one poll,
Yeah.
once everybody
see,
gets through the poll, they can
I'm
submit.
seeing 53% millennials, 27% saying Gen Z, 20% saying Gen X. I'll just repeat that.
Okay. The answer is actually the baby boomers. So the baby boomer, yes,
They
I
play
thought that
video
was
games?
the 25% of baby boomers are playing online video games.
Stop.
And 1 in 4 reports playing online video games. And it's funny because my parents are boomers and they never played
Yeah.
Nintendo with me, ever. So I find that one really shocking. All right, let's, this is kind of not working out as smooth as we want. So we'll go ahead and move on. How's that? Okay.
We'll end the polls.
As we just saw, there are a lot of assumptions, stereotypes, misunderstandings about the generations we work with every single day. And it's easy to see how conflicts and biases in your daily interactions might lead to some frustration. And so these challenges can decrease engagement, lower productivity, and ultimately lead into higher turnover. Some of you are saying, that's, great. So how do I work with them? Others of you might be saying, what the heck is wrong with these people? And wouldn't it be great if we all understood each other more? If we were able to motivate our team members, and we were able to drive others to succeed and just generally work better together. So today we're going to discuss why people in different generations share specific traits. Then we're going to deep dive into each of those generations and learn about their motivations, needs, and strengths. And finally, we will talk about how you can leverage these differences to benefit your team and your firm. And so today is just an overview. Our generational differences workshop is actually much longer and digs into your specific needs on your team and does a little bit more about custom solutions. With limited time today, we're just going to hit the high points. So let's work to transform our frustrations into understanding and appreciation and positive impact. I believe if you harness each generation's strengths, you can truly propel your team's impact. So let's start with the transformation with a little quick answer in the chat. Where have you seen or experienced frustrations between generations at work in the past? Is it in communication? Is it in motivating others? What has kind of been one of your struggles? Is it people understanding where you're coming from? Let's add those to the chat. Expectations and entitlement. Not surprised that would be the first one. Work ethic, beliefs, self-motivation, communication, misexpectations about compensation accountability. These are all very, very common answers. Sensitivity. And so these are all very common answers, and we're going to dig into a number of these and why they show up when we work with different generations and that frustration behind it. So some of you might be asking yourselves, what are these differences? Why are there differences between generations anyway? And I want to caveat the whole rest of this presentation with, when we talk about generational characteristics, they represent what a group that is bucketed in birth years do similarly as a majority. So if 51% of the group answered polls over the last 50 years we've been studying generations in one way, that is now a generational trend. But that could mean 49% of that generation don't do this. So instead of me going through and couching every statement, I'm going to make generalizations in this presentation. But please know, as you've probably seen yourself, you might resonate with one trend that's in your generation and not with another. So let's just know that these are generalizations and we shouldn't generalize, but we're going to. So generational characteristics come to be through 4 influencers during a person's formative years, basically their childhood. And the first is society's expectations. What is valued and expected from the society at large during that time? And there are two big themes under here that are collectivism for the older generations that has now shifted more towards individualism. So think about in the 1940s, you had one TV in the household, everybody sat around, and you had 4 different programs that were pre-selected for you. You could not watch anything else. It was very much about conforming to the norm and seeing what everybody wanted you to be and being together. Now, everybody has an iPhone, you have YouTube, you can watch whatever you want. It has no no collective push towards information. So the next one is technology. And it's been argued that technological advances have been the biggest impact in generational differences. And so we're going to dig into those a little bit more. Major events, pretty obvious. If you ask any silent generation where they were when they heard of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, they can tell you, just like any Gen X can tell you where they were when 9/11 happened. The last one is called aging speed. This is a little new for most of us, but it basically is, what age are you when you reach major milestones, like moving out of the house, getting married, having children, retiring, moving into old age? What age are you actually? And if you think about it, back in the 1930s, it wasn't uncommon for a 16-year-old boy to drop out of high school and start working on his family farm during the Depression to add to the income. It also wasn't uncommon for like my grandfather, who's a silent generation, dropped out of high school the day after Pearl Harbor bombing, signed up for the military at 17, got married the day before he left, and had a kid before he returned from his first stint at war at the age of 18. This was very common back then because you needed to make the ends meet. Our aging speed is slowing down because millennials, who are getting more education than any generation before, and the cost of education and home ownership has risen so much, that generation's actually staying home longer and moving out more in their late 20s, which is postponing things like marriage and children into the early 30s. So our aging speed's slowing down, and this is going to have an impact on how different generations view and behave in the world. So you might be wondering, what defines each generation's boundaries? Formative years of when that generation was between 5 and 20. They say that this grouping of 5 and 20, you have enough memory to remember the big events, and you have similar experiences during that time. Then you move on to 20 and you start your own new experiences. Under 5, you don't remember anything. So as we think back to the technology and major events, what was happening in each of these groups? So back when in the 1930s, this generation grew up during the Great Depression. Many of them were teenagers that entered into World War II military. So the sense of community and duty and loyalty is really dominant in this generation. But also the knowledge of scarcity and working hard is really part of their DNA. So in about 1935, the use of the refrigerator in a home started to be very prominent. And this created some key society changes. So before, when you had to cook everything all day long, now a woman could prep a meal or have leftovers, which allowed her to move to be able to do work outside the home. And additionally, because you could preserve food and have larger amounts of food, the Friday night social where everybody went dancing down at the social club moved to your select group of friends that you wanted to entertain at home, that you wanted to cook a meal for. And so we started to see the move from collectivism more towards individualism. So in the 1940s, the TV started to penetrate homes. With the introduction of the TV, we also saw the standardization of what family life was supposed to look like. And so as you can think about the Leave It to Beavers of the 1950s, 2 parents in the home, mother serving dinner, kids well behaved, everybody dressed nice for dinner. This was really setting a standard for conformity that dominated through the 1950s into the 1960s. However, with the 60s came social unrest through the civil rights and protests to Vietnam. This is shifting the young boomers of this time more towards individualism and social justice and giving it to the man. And this started to move everybody more towards individualism as a generation. A major technology that is really underappreciated that happened in the early 1960s was the birth control pill. And this was a big change in how society moved from it's about the community to it's about me. A woman being able to delay childbearing years, to select when she was going to have children, and to potentially start a career and thrive in a career before she married and had children had a huge impact on societal norms. Enter Woodstock, free love, drugs, the disco era, expressing yourself freely. This is a huge nod to the individualism that carried throughout the 70s and 80s. And then seeing the fabrics of our social norms fall apart. Remember the TV, everybody got to see the same thing. When our renowned and respected public institutions started to fall apart, there became a huge thrive for more independence and rebellion to the standardization and the norm, which accelerated individualism. Well, most of the technology in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was really around home appliances, your vacuum, your washing machines, your different things within companies that had to do with advancing manufacturing. We got the home computer in about 1994. It started to penetrate a lot of homes. And this changed the way we worked, learned, and communicated. The turbulent time of the 90s was the turbulent time of the 90s and early 2000s led to a huge protective culture of the millennials that were growing up during that time. If you've ever heard of helicopter parents, the things like the 9/11 and the Columbine shooting really turned parents to hovering over their children to protect them. Additionally, with the Columbine incident, those children feeling ostracized or not included really took it to this extreme where parents said everybody needs to feel special and everybody gets a trophy at the soccer tournament. So you can see where these behaviors from what was happening in society really came into the childhood of the millennials. Then in rapid succession, personalized and individualized technology like cell phones, the internet, streaming movies, Facebook, iPhones, Twitter, all of this changed the way the Zers and the millennials interacted with each other and with society. And with this access to a lot of information through these digital devices, the Zers were really exposed to a more global perspective of the world. They also were able to hear from people that previously were more silenced from a broad societal base, like the LGBTQ community, various African American and Latino organizations really standing up for driving diversity, appreciation, and inclusion. And they got to see the first African American president. So this generation actually grew up with that more authenticity-driven cohort. Okay, it's a lot of information. I want you to add into the chat, what is something on this slide that I talked about briefly that maybe is different from what you were assuming, or that changes the way that you think of how other people might behave in the workplace? Yes, technology. And the thing that we always think about technology, thank you, Carrie, is we think like computers and widgets, but all the things that have advanced our lives, even automating the ability to not have filing cabinets and being able to work from home, those types of things.
Sienna, I didn't realize that helicopter parenting kind of stemmed from 9/11 and Columbine. It makes sense, but I never put that together in that timeline.
Well, and it's interesting if you look at the timeline with Columbine, it happened in 1999. The oldest millennial was 18 years old. And so they were still in high school. And then something like Columbine, where parents were, so the Xers were raised with very minimal parenting and invasiveness. And we had locks on our doors and did kind of whatever we wanted. Parents were never home. And that was fine. And then all of a sudden Columbine happened. And what happened with parents was I don't know what my kids are doing in their room. I don't know whose house they're at. I don't know where they are right now. And so that hovering over to make sure that their kid was okay and not going to go shoot up a school really pivoted the way that parents took care of those kids in that generation. And there are huge differences between the millennials and Zers. And we will get into that. Okay, let's jump forward. So you're probably asking yourself, who the heck from the silent generation is still working? This is a generation that was born between 1925 and 1945, and they are 79 plus years old. Well, I will tell you, our president, Jane Fonda, who's a huge philanthropist and does a ton of work in raising money for different charities and organizations. Warren Buffett, he still runs his own firm and is well into his 80s. In your organization, there's probably two different groups of silent generation that might be present. One is the owner of the company or the board members, or a lot of the investors could be of that older generation. The other is there's a huge population that are not able to retire and have gone back to work. And so you think of your greeters at Walmart, but you also have a number of those within your firms. There are 500,000 79 plus year old people still in the workforce today. So they come from a more collective society from the 20s and 30s, growing up during the Depression and the war times. It's not surprising to see that their motivators and values are really related to hard work, community, respect of order, seniority, and stability. And so my saying for this generation to help me remember how they might show up at work is honest pay for an honest day's work. So when you think about how they might show up at work, FaceTime, physical FaceTime, not the app, equals work time. And if you think about when they started working, you had to physically be in the factory to work. You had to physically be in the office so you could open up the filing cabinet with the handwritten notes so that you could work as a lawyer. So if you're not in the office, you are not working. And so to them, if you're not butt in seat, you're probably not doing work. And that's just how they were raised for over 50 years in their careers, that you had to be in the office to work. Because of their higher military participation and the experience during the Depression, they are very loyal and very financially prudent. So they are not going to understand frivolities that you're going to want to purchase in your firms. They love a handwritten note. Does anybody, by show of hands, does anybody still write grandma or mom a thank you note for the birthday or something, right? They love that. Don't underestimate that. So when we think about how do we work with members of the silent generation, be clear on expectations and help them know the rules, because they're used to having rules. When should they be in the office? If it's undefined, that's going to really confuse them. So be like, what works for you? Let it be a rule for them. A lot of these people have a ton of knowledge and experience. Show your interest in that knowledge and experience and find ways for them to share it. It is so fun to sit down with somebody who has been through it all and learn from their experiences. And additionally, if you want to show appreciation, write them a handwritten letter, mail it to them, or send it on their desk. It goes a long way. All right, well, let's move on to the boomers. With the formative years being in the 50s and 60s, this generation was born 1946 to 1964. Two notes there. One, it is the longest generation years. It is actually 18 years instead of 15. Second, it is the largest born generation, hence the baby boomers. Post-war, everybody came home and had kids. They thought it would end. It started in 1946. They thought it would end in about 1959. And then there was a huge spike in babies again in 1959. So they just kept it going till 1964. And it may surprise you that there are 17 million boomers still in the workforce. That is a lot of people. And we have influential people like former President Donald Trump, Oprah, Jeff Bezos. And when we think about where this generation came from, growing up in the 50s and 60s, their childhood was dominated by protests and the desire to make positive changes. The shift from collectivism of the silence came individualism, then the desire to achieve things. Finally, it was rewarded and okay for you to stand above others. The majority of their retirement money, so this is an interesting one that I always found people kind of give up for. Oh, they're loyal to their company. They stay at their company for 50 years. You know why? Because their entire retirement was tied to the pension of that company. And so they were huge company loyalists, and they really put their time in to move ahead at that one firm because they got financially rewarded for it. So my saying for them is success takes sacrifice. And as we think about how they likely show up at work, because it takes 1 million men to march in order to change a few laws, this group is super focused on teamwork. They're very collective and working together on consensus. Because time is money, they are very direct in communication and often waste no time sugarcoating the message that they want to tell you, because that is a waste of money. So don't be surprised if they tell you exactly how it's supposed to be and expect you to be okay with it. I do want to warn you that because this generation is so long and so huge, there is what's called a split generation. 50% of this generation is Democrat, 50% of this generation is Republican. You have the traditionalism and good old days like Trump, and you have the innovative and idealistic group like Bezos. You have hippies and free love versus yuppies and power. Think Keanu Reeves versus a Mitt Romney. These people are all in the same generation and show up very differently to work. So this is a group that you want to be very careful about stereotyping and generalizing. All right, so how can we work better with this group? Again, lots of experience and knowledge. So leveraging that to help your younger generations learn through experience from their mistakes and their learnings. Understand that they show up to show they're invested in care. And so appreciating and thanking them when they put in the extra hours, that's motivating them to feel valued. I want to warn you, the iPhone came out when the youngest boomer was 43 years old. The oldest boomer was 61. They had been working 20 plus years before there was a thing called FaceTime or Zoom or any of that. They want to do things in person or over the phone. So now that we know a little bit more about our older generations in the workforce, let's put in the chat, what is something that you might be able to do differently when working with boomers or silent generation? More face-to-face in-person conversations. Yes, thank you. Yes, that is acknowledging loyalty. They don't understand why everybody keeps jumping around on jobs. They think it's frivolous, but that's, that's why they're there. They've been there for so long so they can retire.
And to that point, I think you could give them like they love like the watch for 20 years or
yes, yeah,
like
exactly. The reward for the loyalty.
Reward
exactly.
for the like a physical object as a reward for loyalty.
Yes. And I love this, Carrie. Thank you. The desire for boomers to mentor, they don't really, in their 60s, they don't want to do the paperwork and push the pencil. Like they would love to share that knowledge with somebody who's eager and hungry to learn. And we're going to talk about that synergy in a minute. Okay. Next, we have the Generation Xers. That's my generation, and I believe it's Griffin's as well. Our formative years were in the 70s and 80s. It's a large generation born between, or smaller generation than the rest, born between 1965 and 1979. And there's 43 million of them in the workforce. Influential leaders like Elon Musk, Sheryl Sandberg, and Stacey Abram. And given their age, you can probably expect Gen Xers to be the vast majority of people leaders right now. So most people in people leader positions are going to be of the Gen X. The Gen Xers, as many of you may know, are often referred to as the latchkey kids. This is the reference to a key that was actually worn around your neck or put underneath a mat at your house to let yourself in after school because it was more prominent for you to have dual parents working, or to have a single parent that was working that you came home to. This generation values independence and autonomy. They are used to being alone and being on their own. And with this, they probably ended up getting into a little more trouble than most other generations. The late 70s and 80s were pretty turbulent and violent. There were AIDS, the war on drugs, inflation in the 70s. So this group grew up a little bit more skeptic and hard realists. They don't sugarcoat things. Raised by the yuppies of the 80s, and then getting exposed to shows like Dallas, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and even Beverly Hills 90210, this group associates material things with status and success. And so I call them the work hard, play hard generation. So how are they going to show up at work? Gen X members expect to do things the way they want to because they've always been left to their own devices. They want to avoid bureaucracy or anything that doesn't make sense to move a project forward, and they will tend to solve their own problems without asking for help. Additionally, ever more individualistic, they're fine with change as long as it benefits them. If it's good for them, then it's fine. But if change puts more work on their plate or it's not understood by them and it just seems like busy work, they're going to complain. So how do we work with our Xers better? They don't need nor want a ton of guidance, but they also don't provide it. And so if you work with an Xer, you may need to ask for help or ask for time on their calendar to learn new traits. Like I said, they're used to just winging it on their own. And so that natural tendency to be like, what do you need from me? It just isn't there as much. So ask for what you need from them. Removing busy work will reduce the frustration. They do not like to check boxes and get things done in the sense of it's just to get it done. It's much more, how do I get success? How do I move forward? All right, up next we have the millennials. This is also known as Gen Y. And the formative years were in the 90s and early 2000s, with this group being born 1980 to 1994. And as you can imagine, being in their prime working years now, this is the largest part of the workforce today at 50 million employees in this group. They also are known to be one of the groups that get the most flack. So given that they outsize all the rest of us, we probably should learn how to work with them better. This generation is also split in identity. And so as you think about that aging speed, this generation is now coming upon, the older part of this generation is coming upon major life milestones like owning a house, having children, getting married. So they're starting to identify more with older generations. The younger group is actually trying to slow that process down, and they are postponing marriage and children is longer. And so they are identifying more with the individualism of the youngest generations. We have leaders like Mark Zuckerberg, Meghan Markle, and Evan Spiegel. And versus Gen X, this group is more into community and social consciousness. They value the quality of leadership versus respecting the seniority, the title, or the time put in. Huge consumers of knowledge and the most educated group of any generation. 70% of millennials have an associate's degree or higher. 70%. They are huge consumers of information and knowledge. And like I said, given that the Columbine shooting happened before any of them graduated high school, and the financial crisis happened before majority of them graduated college, they have a much more seize the day, tomorrow is unknown attitude. While the Xers would love to get lots of money to buy things, this generation is fearful of what's going to happen in the future and tends to use their money for experiences in the moment. So how will millennials show up at work? Digital experts, they grew up texting, posting, and are very comfortable with informal communication, both in the channels, but also in their acronyms and slangs. This group loves to be valued, and investing in developing them shows that you value their efforts. This is where we can do a lot of pairing with the boomers to help this generation develop further. And while I want to warn you, if you're working with a millennial, whatever you say, they will verify. So they are not, it's not that they don't respect you. It's that Google was launched before any millennial was out of high school. So when a teacher would say something, they could Google it. When a parent would say something, they could Google it. And so when they have just become natural verifiers, it's not disrespect, it's just a behavior. So how can we work better with our millennials? One, be authentic, transparent, and genuinely care about developing them. Bring meaning to their work. This is actually Gen Y, and they are called the Y generation. They will ask why. Why should I do that? Why do I need to do that? Why do we need to do that? And the reason is that they've always been given justifications from their parents and society as to why things are happening. So bringing the meaning behind their work drives results for the firm, the clients, and the community. What is in this? Why are you photocopying this piece of paper? Well, because this is how it's going to impact the bottom line, the long-term picture, really driving the meaning behind the work. I want to cover a quick area. Griffin, you and I are both at the cusp, right, of this generation. We are towards the bottom of X and right above some millennials. And there's blurry lines as to the exact date. Do you resonate more with the Gen X or the millennials?
The Gen X, I would say.
Okay.
How about you?
Do you have older siblings or younger siblings?
I have an older sibling.
So do I. And I am born 6 months before the cutoff for millennials. And so I have older brothers that are actually both boomers. And so when I grew up, the 80s and the 70s were part of my childhood, and therefore I resonate more with Gen Z. I have friends, and you too as well, Griffin. I have friends who are actually 6 months or whatever older than me, but have younger parents and all younger siblings, and they tend to resonate more with some trends in the millennials. So this is not a diehard cut January 1st type of cutoff. It's more what was going on in your formative years around you that influenced how you grew up. All right. Last one. Finally, we have the Zers. Formative years, 2000, 2010s. These are individuals who are 29. That's not, everybody thinks Zers are like 18. They're 29 through 12-year-olds. They have huge influential leaders that are very on moralistic and mission-oriented drives, like Simone Biles, Mala Yousafzai, and Congressman Maxwell Frost. And you might have noticed that only a third of this generation is actually in the workforce right now, but they've officially topped the amount of boomers in the workforce at 17.1 million. This generation is very different from the millennials, and they are very proud of being very different from the millennials. They're much more competitive, independent, and wanting to be measured on their merits versus everybody gets a ribbon. They are the most individualistic generation yet, and they have huge amounts of creativity and resilience. Having been young kids during 9/11, experiencing over 200 school shootings and recent year and growing up through the pandemic, they crave safety and security. They are my BU unapologetically generation. At work, they are self-proclaimed digital addicts, and they expect things like social media, text, news feeds to be allowed and available at work. Similar to Gen X, they're super entrepreneurial, but conversely to Gen X, they want to see who they are communicating with. So think of all of us older people, and you say, call me, and you hold up the phone to your ear. My son, who's Gen Z, will go, call me, and he holds it up to the front of his face because he has never made a phone call without FaceTime. So be prepared for them to stand up for what they think, because they will. All right. How do we work best with our new generation? Provide them opportunities to multitask. Given all of the information that's coming in at them and the average of usage of 5 different devices within a day, they're pretty good at multitasking, and they like to be able to shift from one thing to another and back so that they can keep their energy up. Allowing them to work on their own, but be available for questions and support. So say, what do you need from me? They may say nothing. Say, well, when you need something, here's how you can contact me. Remember that this generation was coming of age during the pandemic. Given that most of your employees likely graduated college during the pandemic, they have never needed to be butt in seat, and they've chosen their schedules for most of their adult life. They like flexibility and work-life balance. Okay. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of information. A lot of hopefully a couple of tricks of the trade that you were like, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. So now what? Well, learning a little bit about each generation's values and traits is a really good beginning to just appreciate where other people in your office are coming from. You should consider sharing this information with your team members, and help them learn more about their coworkers. If you're especially interested in this, if it kind of makes you geek out a little bit, I highly recommend this book. It's called Generations by Dr. Jean Twenge. It is a fabulous book, lots of data if you're analytical and you like your data, but also a great read and has a good information about different generations. And I was working with a client recently, and they had all 5 generations in the office every day. And they reached out to me and said, we are just really having a hard time with engagement. And there's a lot of conflict in conversations and meetings. And we've had high turnover. And after looking at the firm a little bit more and doing some research, it was apparent to me that much of the strife was a result of the Gen X leaders wanting everybody else in the firm to think and act like they did. They established procedures and protocols and expectations based on what they were used to. And they had all these other generations that just got frustrated with some of these procedures. They were sticking to what they knew for motivation and norms and rewards. They weren't understanding the needs of their team members. What did they want in their culture? So we did a 90-minute generational workshop with the full staff. And in addition to providing a little bit more detail, we sat individuals with people from different generations in groups and had them discuss what their frustrations were and brainstorm ideas of how you could make modifications within the workplace. We shared personal experiences, and we came to some small changes that made big differences in how people felt valued and seen. We broke down the barriers, dissolved some stereotypes, and developed empathy and understanding. And what we did is emphasize what each person brings to the table versus fixed on what they do differently or wrong. And we realized that when you add the strengths of all these generations, you get a powerhouse team. Imagine combining experience of ones with the passion to learn of others. You can partner a realistic problem solver with creative innovators. You can combine financial prudence with optimism. Imagine how powerful your team can be when each member shows up at their best. So my goal as a coach and consultant is to help us build an environment where everybody wants to go to work because they're valued, appreciated, seen, and engaged. And so there's multiple different offerings there. I do team engagements, professional coaching, development workshops, rising leaders. And I want your firm to be a talent magnet and a retention titan. And if this resonated with you, I'd love to talk more about it. Reach out to Griffin. But I want to answer questions before we finish off. So what questions do we have?
Feel free to throw them in the chat or just be brave and ask with your video on, I guess, depending what generation you are. If you like face-to-face, get your face out here. I'll ask while everyone's thinking. You mentioned you made some small changes that led to really big results. And I've been kind of like writing down ideas for each generation. Are there a couple that come to mind that you can give us as examples of like, what's one little change that you made? And then how was that impact felt?
So yeah, one that I noticed was at this firm, mentors were based in like your channel. And so like the Gen X was being mentored by a person right above them, or maybe two steps above them in that channel. And so depending on what area they were, if they were in digital advertising or marketing, they tended to have people from the same generation in their mentorship line versus reaching out to other departments like product development or sales that had people from different generations. And so what we did was shift a little bit of the mentorship program so that you were working with somebody that had to be out of your division and out of your generation for the mentor and mentee partnership.
Yeah.
Another one that we did was really work on the terminology and assumptions. So millennials hate when people call them lazy. They are not lazy. They're just motivated by different things. And so we talked a lot about those messages that come through and trying to prevent using that terminology. Well, they don't want to work. Well, they do want to work, right? So trying to figure out how to change those messages. So we said, I need to figure out how to get them in the office more versus they don't want to work.
Right.
And so worked on rephrasing things that were more about the behavior than the thought process.
Stereotype. Right. Okay, great. Francis from our team is a millennial. He wants to know, how do the different generations interact? He's heard that Xers and boomers tend to have more personality conflicts with the silent generation, and Zers strangely seem to, and then the silent generation and the Zers together understand each other.
And that is true. The collectivism, and when you think back to some of those, right, those traits that we talked about, the collectivism that is starting, that the working together, the more community effort, the being able to see everybody and including everybody of the Zers, oddly enough, pairs with the we're all in it together generation of the silence.
Right.
The boomers and Xers do tend to do a lot of this. And it's because both of them have high individualism. So their way is the right way. The other person's way is the wrong way. And so you tend to hear a lot of they do it that way or they don't do it this way between those two generations. And it's because their way is the right way. And so being able to see, oh, I see why they would want to do it a different way really helps break that down.
Yeah. Great. Anything else? Anybody wants to ask Shanna here while we've got her? All right. Well, we've got a lot of positive feedback in the chat.
I do want to close with a story, if you don't mind.
Please.
So I'm going to tell you about a story of a time when one generation was trying to get something from another generation and it wasn't working for them. So here's how the story goes. It's my 12-year-old son. It's a couple of years ago, last year. Mom, I need a phone. I need a phone. I need an iPhone. I have to have an iPhone. It's so important. I can't like live without it. It's like I'm so. The Xer, you don't need an iPhone. You're fine. No, Mom, you don't understand. Like, you're not fair. It's not fair. You don't love me. The Xer, I do love you and you're fine. He was not getting what he wanted with his needs, trying to match my needs. So he decided to change his approach and he wrote an email. I have printed it off. Mom, the only thing I want for my birthday is an iPhone. The reason that I want an iPhone is that my iPad is 5 years old, pandemic kid, and it barely works. One more reason that I know you are worried about my safety, and I can actually text you and call you from an iPhone, and I can't do that from an iPad because you have an Android. On my phone, I will pay for everything, including cellular, monthly bill, and any apps that you approve I can download. To earn money, I will mow the lawn this summer. I will also be more helpful around the house and with the dog. I know you are concerned with screen time, so I will only be on my phone for an hour and 30 minutes a day. I love you sincerely, my son. He got the phone. So when I think about how we are approaching each other, we can be my way is the right way and I'm going to do it my way and they all need to fix. Guess what? You're going to have really poor results with that approach. So thinking about what's important to the other generation, what are they motivated by? What are they looking for in the solution? And approaching it that way, likely to get you an iPhone.
Amazing. Shanna, thank you so much. This material was so concise and so well summarized, and I have so many great takeaways, and I know that everybody here does as well. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Incredible way. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Please reach out to me if Shanna can help your team work through any kind of intergenerational challenges, help build culture. If you'd like to follow up with her on specific questions, I know she'd love to answer them for you. So
Absolutely.
thank you. Happy summer. Thanks again for being here. And we look forward to talking with you all soon. Thanks,
Bye.
Shanna.
Thank you.
That was great.